With major updates for Splatoon 3 seemingly coming to an end with the sills season, it's inevitably sparked up a debate that has been slowly bubbling to the surface as people have been more and more voicing their displeasure with the post-launch aspects of Splatoon 3. There's starting to become a growing amount of chatter that 2 is better than 3, at least on Twitter, which is the place where misery thrives and nuance and optimism go to die. So take it with a grain of salt, but I thought this might be worth having a discussion in video form about. Like and subscribe if you enjoy, let's get into it. At first, it might seem crazy to some that anyone would ever consider Splatoon 2 to be better than Splatoon 3, but there are some valid points that side makes in my opinion, and I think it's only fair to look at their arguments made by both sides before dismissing someone's opinion. And besides, it's an opinion, everyone's entitled to one, so let's look at the primary arguments for the Splatoon 2 fans. By the way, if there's anything I miss about our game that serves as a reason for your preference, feel free to let me know down in the comments, because I'll be trying to go over what I view as the major points. And even then, that's probably just scratching the surface of this debate. One of the big things that has endeared people to Splatoon 2, especially as it pertains to Splatoon 3's faults, is the update cycle. Splatoon 3, as we know, opted for a seasonal approach when it came to updates, with more content being consolidated into drops every 3 months, unlike previous games, where it would be something like a periodic stage drop and a weapon just about every week. This meant that there would constantly be something new for even the less serious players to look forward to, even if it was just one new weapon. This also meant that there wasn't as much relying on the updates to be massive game changers, because less was to be expected with updates of this frequency, and there was always next week for another weapon or something to be added to the game. Along with that, there were still big trailers that hyped up new versions of the game, such as the iconic trailers for versions 3 and 4.0. The game was constantly staying fresh, if you will. Another thing that I think people enjoyed about 2 more than 3 is the Splatfest. Now, do Splatfest and 2 largely suffer from a lot of the same problems I have with them in 3, and for that matter, the entire series? Yes, but there is one key thing that 2 did differently that helped make the experience more memorable, and to a lot of people, was their favorite part about Splatfest in 2. The shifty stations. For those who don't know, for every Splatfest in 2, there'd be the normal maps in every rotation, but also one map that was unique to that Splatfest, and would implement unique gimmicks and objects from the hero modes, such as flutters, spinners that paint the map as they move along, ink throwers, geysers, and many more. They all shared the name Shifty Station, but did get their own names when content updates came to an end. Even if you didn't like the general gameplay of Splatfest, I think that a lot of people were at least looking forward to the Shifty Stations because they were completely new experiences. Also, despite my disdain for Turf War, at least in a competitive sense, casually it's fine. Some of those games on MC Princess Diaries were some of the most fun I've ever had playing the series, and I'll look back on them fondly for a long time. Thirdly, and most importantly, I wanted to talk about the big part of 2 that helped to really revitalize the game. Octo Expansion. Octo Expansion has received its fair share of praise from pretty much every notable personality in the community, and for good reason. It's a genuinely fantastic side campaign, so much so that I think there's still value in 2 just for it alone. Octo Expansion gave us what we so desperately wanted from the single player campaigns. Something new. Instead of the hide and seek game with invisible kettles and having to play every level, Octo Expansion provided a lot more freedom in choosing how you wanted to play the mode, as the only requirement was that you needed to collect all 4 things. Adding on to doing something different, it also has uniquer level concepts. Rather than go from point A to point B like normal, there will often be twists on that formula, like having to guide an able to the end and making sure it doesn't fall, or you might have to complete a certain objective, such as clear all the crates in a single shot, make a bingo on a 3x3 board with a limited amount of 8 balls, clear the stage with a limited amount of ink, complete an objective in a limited amount of time, clear the level without taking damage, and more. It also gives some much needed exposition for Pro and Marina, and it's one of the primary things that makes those 2 characters so beloved by the fanbase today. And oh my goodness, the escape sequence and final boss is one of, if not my best experience ever with this series. The levels, the music playing during them, and the credits rolling just causes a wave of nostalgia to flood back to me, and I can't blame anyone who looks back on Octo Expansion and came away from Splatoon 3 feeling like there was never a moment in that game that fully replicated that experience. Now that we talked about the major points, at least as I've seen, from the Splatoon 2 side, let's go over to the Splatoon 3 side with the points I'm a lot more familiar with. First off, Splatoon 3 was a much more packed game at launch than Splatoon 2. I think that we definitely sometimes forget just how much content Splatoon 2 lacked at launch. The game had 8 stages, no clan blitz, and it didn't even have all of the main weapons from the first game at launch, as some of those were added in updates. Meanwhile, Splatoon 3 had every main weapon from the past in the game at launch, along with new main weapons, 12 stages, a single player campaign that is overwhelmingly considered to be superior to the base game campaign 2 by a fair margin, an entirely separate game mode in Table Turf, Salmon Run available all the time, along with additions to Salmon Run such as Extra Wave and the new boss salmonids, and all the Anarchy modes at launch, with a couple of them even being changed to account for common issues with the modes in previous games. With the amount of claims needed to make a power claim in Clam Blitz being reduced from 10 to 8, and there being checkpoints in Rainmaker, so one wipe will immediately result in a massive, if not game-winning push for the team who got the wipe. The devs made sure you were getting more bang for your buck compared to the first two games at launch, and though some may argue it overall negatively affected the game during the post-launch update cycle, that's really no excuse to have a game be less content-rich at launch. Secondly, on top of there being more content at launch, a lot of it felt more improved on Splatoon 3's side, or at the very least, there were fewer weird design choices made that hampered the experience. As I mentioned earlier, Return of the Mammalians is widely considered to be better than Octo Canyon, as it takes some of the better ideas from Octo Expansion, different clear conditions, having more freedom in which levels you choose to beat, even if it's still fairly linear otherwise, not forcing you to go too far out of your way to look for kills anymore, as they're not hidden, and more. There's also the previously mentioned Salmon Run improvements, being playable all the time, new boss salmonids, extra wave, along with big run and extra work. The third major argument made by the Splatoon 3 side has a lot more to do with Splatoon 2's faults, which is that in spite of the current problems with the game's meta, they'd still rather go through that than the infamously dubbed quad shooter meta that plagued endgame Splatoon 2. To refresh memories and enlighten those not in the know, towards the end of Splatoon 2, team comps were notorious for often having some combination of the following: a Jet Squelcher, NZAP 85, Kensa Splattershot, Foil Squeezer, Kensa Jr., or Kensa 52 Gal, with maybe a few alternatives on certain map modes. There was also an infamous game in Area Cup back in Splatoon 2 in which both teams ran a Jet Squelcher and Kensa Splattershot that both spent the entire game farming missiles, and almost never leaving said farming spots. Now I have tackled what I think are the three biggest points from both sides. I wanted to talk about my stance on the debate in the past, how it shifted since then, and why it ultimately made me come to think the debate is kinda silly. If I had made this video about a year ago, back when this game was still actively getting major content, which it still could get some knowable updates after this season, for all we know, then I would have called you crazy if you thought Splatoon 2 was better, for a lot of the points I brought up in this video. But as we approach Grand Festival, at least when I'm editing this video, hi future me, that stance has started to shift a lot more to understanding the other side, and breaking the debate down into two different parts: the game itself, and the experience with the game. As objective games, I think that Splatoon 3 just does so much to improve on what 2 built up, that in spite of its flaws and missed potential, I can't help but consider it an objectively better game than 2. But when it comes to both games as an experience, I honestly think Splatoon 2 has the edge here for me. Talk about the endgame meta all you want, but to be honest, meta only really applies to a small portion of the player base, and it's kinda unfair to just judge the entire 5-year experience by what it was like in its last year, because the era from Octo Expansion to Final Fest is what I consider to be the greatest era of the entire series, from both a competitive and casual lens. We had those cool casual experiences, along with the rock paper scissors meta between Brellas, Dualies, and Blasters, which is arguably the most beloved meta in Splatoon's history. The only real moments from the post-launch cycle of 3 that have gotten me close to that side is the side order trailers, the first big run, and depending on if stuff from Data Mines is accurate, which for the sake of protecting some of spoilers, I won't talk about here, the final Splatfest, even if I may not like the topic, could be a genuinely insane, unforgettable memory as well. This all brings me to say that in general, there's not really a wholly definitive Splatoon experience, as I think each game has its own advantages that might make one like it more than the other. Splatoon 1 has the nostalgic vibe from people who played it as kids, and some of its objective flaws endear people to that game, which as I thought about it, kinda reminds me of Smash Melee. Splatoon 2 is a slower paced game at higher levels of play, and is often nowadays not looked back on as fondly by more competitive players, though some may admire its focus on more coordinated play. But you can't deny that from a more casual perspective, there were some fun memories that may stick with those players, and even some of the previously mentioned competitive players for years. Kinda remind me of Smash Brawl, and maybe a bit of 4. And lastly, Splatoon 3 feels like it tries to be a leveler to what people liked about both games, while trying to refine both of those aspects in order to make the ultimate experience of the first saga of Splatoon, as they said. See what I did when I said ultimate? This is to say that the debate is kinda pointless in my opinion. The problem with this debate in the first place is that the aim of it from people is often to explain why their answer is objectively correct. However, this question will often only spark subjective answers, and subjectivity is largely based on people's inherent biases, whether it be recency bias, nostalgia bias, negativity bias, etc. Due to this, any debates often get nowhere, so I've learned to agree to disagree when it comes to this topic. Anyways, with that out of the way, let me leave it to the comments. Which Splatoon game is your favorite and why? Thanks for watching, and have a great day.